Hey, how's it going? It's nice to see you again. In October of 2024, I released my 5th studio album, A Walkthrough. And today in front of me, I have the session for the second song off the track list, The Silos. It's been a little while since we've done one of these. The last production video I did was in 2021 for my album Lavender. And since then, I've learned so much more about production, approaches to engineering, and philosophies for songwriting, which I would love to share with you today. So grab a cup of tea or some coffee or water in my case, and let's talk about this song. There's a couple different places that we can start. I want to tell you about the thematic structure of the whole album. It's called A Walkthrough, and it's centered around field recordings of me walking in different environments. Every song, ironically besides The Silos, is named after the environment in which they were recorded. The rain, the lake, the leaves, etc. This song is centered around a recording that I did in Central Park of me walking on ice. The first part is cut up. The second part of the first verse is left to more free time. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. This was not, however, the first element that I added to this song. The first thing that I did was record one long take of the entire song on a Hammond organ. Now, there's a couple different approaches that you can take when recording live instruments. For this specific composition, I wrote the song on the organ, performed the whole thing, composed the whole 9 yards in this one take. So this is our foundation. I like to approach songs these days, at least for the album A Walkthrough, with full takes of live performances. This song, as you notice, is not actually structured to the grid. It's a little bit off because I didn't record with a click. I recorded to the drum machine of the actual organ, which sounds like this. So there's 4 microphones on this organ, and I'll talk about the engineering in a moment when we take a look at the engineering of the entire track. But it goes from the footsteps and the drum machine to the bass pedal, all in one take, to organ. And then we hear this element. There are many parts of this song that started out as an experiment, and the Mood Vox, which I'm calling this track, is one such experiment. So I have this pedal here, the Mood Mark II by Chase Bliss. Big fan of Chase Bliss. In my opinion, it's worth the premium because they're doing things that aren't really being done in the pedal world as of right now. So this, I started out, recorded the whole organ, layered footsteps, which I think actually came after the fact, and was trying to build out the production and was having a hard time of it, to be honest. This was a tough song to crack because it's so different for me. I mostly do all of my production around piano or guitar or other traditional instruments that aren't necessarily treated in the same way that electronic instruments are. So I was having a hard time with what I wanted the sonic elements to represent. And by accident, I have this kind of rig where I can plug a microphone into my pedals. This is an Audio-Technica CP8201 microphone impedance matching transformer. If you can get a preamp for your microphones to plug into pedals, do that. This one, it works, but it's a little bit noisy and finicky at points. But for the sake of this song, we don't need the recordings to be very clean or sterile. In fact, the additional imperfections add a lot of character, in my opinion. So I'm just singing a melody, I think with the reverb and it's pitched, or the delay, I should say. And that may be the loop section of the pedal. It has 2 different types, or 2 different parts to it, reverb, delay, so atmospherics and ambient textures, and then a micro looper that is constantly sampling what you put into it, and it will capture a short loop of what you play, in this case, my singing that's pitched up. So it kind of gives an eerie feel. You have these footsteps that are kind of crunchy. I wanted each field recording to thematically connect with the song that they're about. And this song is kind of distant, kind of icy, cold, lonely perhaps. And what better sound than a single person walking on ice in Central Park? You can actually hear some sirens in the back because New York City. So as for the timing of this, again, I cut up this one take, which was probably me walking for about 2 or 3 minutes or so. Cut them up to match the impacts on the grid of the drum machine. And then it kind of goes more into free time and the steps aren't perfectly aligned. You can take different approaches when treating ambient or textural elements of your song. And in this case, this kind of serves both a percussive element function, and it also serves as a spatial awareness kind of texture. So you know that we're kind of in a physical environment when we're listening to the song. It puts you in a specific place. So those are our 3 elements. Down here we have some drum microphones that I just left on because I thought they were producing some noise. Turns out they are so low in the mix that you can't even hear them. It's some rain if I really pull it up by like a lot of decibels. So that's pretty much a non-element, but just a little bit of microphone noise, me moving on their drum set, distant rain, but it's very subtle. So then we go into the first verse, and it's just organ, 4 microphones, footsteps, vocals.
The cold, frozen soil sees both barren silos.
This is recorded dry. I set up kind of a makeshift vocal booth. I put blankets around me. I didn't want to go too overboard with it because in the room that I was recording in, it was treated. It's a really great sounding live room, and I wanted to lean into that with the vocals. They are close recorded, so you can't hear much of it.
The season's strange, more snow than normal.
But you can hear a ambient kind of sound that is a microphone in a room. It's subtle.
I'm all alone to smolder
Now,
in the wool.
Additional elements. We both have melodic elements, atmospheric and textural elements, and the return of the thematic element of the mood vox. As you can see from these 5 tracks, so this one's not really doing anything, so let's say 4. I cut in between the different takes and the different sounds. What I like to do when recording with specifically the mood pedal or pedals that are kind of unpredictable is to just let myself record a single take of that element and see what happens. It's very experimental. And then I take the parts that I like and I cut them up. You can see it done in different parts of the song here. But the organ, the footsteps, and this mood vox are really the core pieces of this song. And the production expands and evolves around these elements. So this mood, instead of going from one voice, is kind of a more expanded choir. The mood pedal, the Mark II specifically, has this feature called spread, which puts the delay or reverb or slip effects into the hard left and hard right stereo field. And so I'm using that to my advantage to increase the amount of space within this track. Because the organ's mono, the footsteps mono, and then you just have this stereo vox and then these elements that are hard panned as well. So for the actual vox, this is the micro looper. This is just me singing with one voice, going and repeating it with the looper function. Next, we have these 2 Telecasters. So this is the first introduction of guitar, which is an element that we will hear later in the song as well. So this is going through both the hologram microcosm and the Chase Bliss warped vinyl hi-fi that both leans into the noise of the Telecaster and also gives it kind of an atmospheric texture to it, the hologram that is. So you have those, then you also have this Wurlitzer emulation, also going through both, I think, the Chase Bliss for the reverb, the bit crust reverb, and then the hologram microcosm. Just to enhance the melody and also to give another texture. Footsteps cut to tempo. Leading into the pre-chorus.
Look, a lantern aglow, rid of phantoms.
There is a melodic motif on the organ that I am enhancing with synthesizers. Da, 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 which is also the vocal melody. So these synthesizers here are doing a couple things. These are textures that also serve as ramps into the chorus. So you have this really sci-fi sounding atmosphere, very pad oriented. You also have a synthesizer that is stacking the melody as well. With the organ, so now is an interesting time to talk about the recording of the actual organ itself. There are 4 microphones on the organ that I cut in between at different points in the song. For the most part, it is all 4 microphones. So you have one for the drum machine, which sounds like this. You have one for the organ itself. You have one for the bass pedal. And then one room mic. Blend it all together. And manually phase aligned. That's important as well. So I wanted to capture this organ in a live space because it's so cool to have a physical instrument in front of you. And when recording with 4 different microphones, an organ that is small enough to where you have bleed from different speakers, you have to lean into that as well. Because if you can hear the drum machine in the organ. You can hear the kick drum and the bass. And the drum machine. The room's capturing the whole thing from a distance, and you even hear the bleed from the organ in the drum mic. So all those things put together, you have a really clear image of where this organ sits in a room, but you also have the clarity of the individual sounds themselves. And there's additional processing, there's a little bit of saturation and high passing and low passing to try and minimize the bleed as much as possible, but again, it's best to lean into it. So you have the drum machine up until the second chorus, which we're transitioning into. The other elements here are backing vocals. This is the first time that we hear overdubs. And I wanted to make it a point to have all of my actual overdubs, and not the harmonies, to be hard in the center.
Look, a lantern aglow, rid of phantoms.
Because we're introducing a lot of new texture, I wanted the vocal to sound like one cohesive instrument. So it's all down the middle and it's all just emphasizing key lines. We have atmosphere, texture, left, right, melody, and vocals down the middle. And then we have these additional harmonies that come in hard panned left, right.
Sometimes I see you move with much speed, your bushel filled with wheat seeds.
Playing around with different parts of the voice to make it sound like more than one voice. So I'm singing in falsetto, I'm singing in my chest voice and head voice. This is a really classic technique when you only have one vocalist, but you want it to sound a lot larger than life. My philosophy with recording vocal dubs and harmonies, I used to do choir, so I have a very vague understanding of layering, but a lot of it is down to experimentation and improvisation. In the sense of, I am throwing paint against a canvas to see what sticks, to see what sounds good and what works for the song, because not everything does. It's a long, arduous process that might be quicker up front, but more difficult when you're actually doing it, as opposed to writing a vocal harmony or an overdub, say on paper or however you write. All of the work is up front in comparison to the actual recording, which is more seamless. The work here in the recording is quicker because I have takes that I can see if I like or not, but then the back end is more difficult because it takes a longer time to get to a finished product. So then we transition into the chorus. We have these ramps that really help us, and then we have the mood vox come back as well, leading us into the chorus. Then, the introduction of so many new elements and sounds. My favorite element, maybe in this entire song, besides the mood vox, is this little synthesizer that was, in fact, a happy accident. I was just playing a synth through the mood pedal. It was all in one take, same thing. If we pull one of these tracks down and hear the actual whole thing without my cuts, it's a little bit less rhythmic and not in as choice of moments. So I took what I liked from that and then cut it up to have this kind of leading line. This is what my ear grasps onto in this chorus, and it's really quite a great hook, even though it's very simple. And then I actually stack that with vocal dubs as well. So that's one new element. Let me just play it going into the chorus to hear what it sounds like. We also have the introduction of drums, live drums, and the drum machine is cut here. So it's the drum machine and the live drumming is passing the baton throughout the song. It comes back in, again, the pre-chorus and comes back a little bit. But besides that, it's mostly live drums. So the chorus sounds like this.
Oh, all I want is love. With you, we'll get through.
Besides the drums, which sound like this, it's recorded with 5 microphones, I played both rim shots and the actual snare. So this is the same track. I've just isolated the hits to process them differently. This is what drums sound like. You have overheads slightly panned, but not by much. They're mostly mono. So you have a kick drum mic, snare mic, 2 overheads, a room mic, and a tom mic. Guilty confession, I can't tune toms very well, so I ended up not using it a lot just because it sounds like that. Sounds very basketball-y. These drum mics are also manually phase aligned or phase flipped to maintain that phase cohesion. But I took out the bleed from the tom mic just because it wasn't very pleasant and it muddied the sound a little bit. The next couple elements are these slide guitars that are probably played with an ebow, I believe. And then synthesizers, which this is an interesting technique that I think I learned about this from Tom York's Dawn chorus, in which there's one synthesizer, but instead of playing all the notes in one take, in one like stereo track, I split out the different parts of the chord or the voicing into individual mono tracks and panned them and played them individually. So you have more control over how you want the tone of the stereo field, and you have a little bit more precision, and I think it adds an interesting element of inaccurate timing as well, because they're not all played together. This is kind of outlining the harmony and the melody a little bit. Here's the bass and the organ. And then that little melody synth that's really loud in the mix. So without the organ or any of the drums or anything, the ambient sounds like this together. Then you can add the vocal overdubs, the vocals themselves, the lead,
Get through.
overdubs,
All I want is warmth from you.
So these dubs are really tight, and that's because with the addition of new harmonic elements coming from the synthesizers and the guitars and the excitement of the drums, I don't want to add any more content to the vocals for it to be distracting. So
From you,
a little bit of harmony,
will lead well. Let me
but it's subtle.
with you.
It's mainly just following the main vocal. So then that takes us into verse 2.
Let me cook and feed you. I'll eat only after you. I'll cradle you when your knees are bruised. We'll wake in the morning to the harvest moon.
So, two crucial elements are added. A clean guitar, which we hear again in the outro. It brings a smile to my face. That's cool. There's a lot of dead notes in there too. And then, crucially, the saxophone. Just the sax by themselves. They're hard panned and then one-centered. So you kind of have the center one acting as a melody and these two, or a leady melody I should say, and these two kind of supporting it on the outside left and right channels. So together with all the drums, which is a little bit tighter, I think you don't have any, really any cymbals besides the hi-hat. The ride's out with the saxophone, guitar, and then the footsteps too. And then the organ's cut here because I wanted to have this to be a different tone change than the chorus, which you can just hear all the sustain and the decay of the organ. Here, it's cut, so it's a little bit cleaner and it cleans up and leaves space for the other elements. The silence goes a long way for the groove. For example, if I just extended these out a little bit and you could hear all of the bleed, it's a little bit less clean. It's less rhythmic. You hear what I mean? It's subtle, but it's enough to make a difference. So you can do a lot of manipulation with your audio just by cutting and actually changing them on the timeline instead of processing them with effects. You could do the same thing with a gate, but I find that with really precise rhythmic changes, I want to have the control over the tone manually, even though it takes more time. And the same is to be said with the footsteps as well. As you can see, they're all cut up. And it is a quite painstaking process because each one of these impacts is a unique footstep and sound. So there is no repetition. And that leads for a very natural kind of evolving sound as each footstep kind of has its own feeling to it, while also kind of being in time through the process of manually cutting. It's a bit obtuse, but for this album, I found that process to be the most intuitive. So again, you don't have much else going on besides all these vocal stacks. I'll just play the lead and all the dubs.
And feed you. I'll eat only after you. I'll cradle you when your knees are bruised. We'll wake in the morning to the harvest moon.
Not all of the vocals end at the same time. For the most part, I try and align the transients manually as well, just on the grid, but sometimes I like there to be a little bit of flexibility there. And again, you have this mood vox kind of going crazy in the second half. isolating that. Again, same instrument, but now the effects are cranked. A lot more reverb or delay. And that is still the voice. That's the same instrument that we've been hearing the whole time, just in a different context. And now going into the second pre-chorus, it's really ramping up. So we have those kind of original melodies, but now we have all of these plucky guitars as well.
Look, a lantern aglow, rid of phantoms. I see you move with my...
And these are subtle as well. They're just following the same melody that this synth, the triangle synth from the original pre-choruses. They're clipped pretty aggressively, as you can hear, and they're also really noisy, which I don't mind. I like using them as a texture. Sorry, I'm battling this setting sun here. The light's a little aggressive. I'm gonna back up a bit. So here we are. We have the slide telly from earlier back as well, and then all the synthesizer stuff again. And then the drums, the drum machine comes back for this and is playing in tandem with the actual live drums here. Drum machine, and you have kicks emphasized by the live kit. And then you have a ramp up here that kind of gets more aggressive. You have a building energy into the next chorus, which is really the big event of this song. I still love that every time I hear it. It sounds fresh. Now this is a monster of a stack. We have so many saxophones. We have 10 layers of saxophone just in the intro of the chorus, and then we have all of these supporting saxophones. I think it's what, 12 or so. Yeah, it's a lot of saxophones, and that sounds like this. So rich, so warm. That's just so fun, isn't it? So breaking down this stack a little bit, you have these low saxophone notes. You have a harmony with that, which just that alone, you could stop there and it would sound good, but I keep adding, those are the legato parts of the saxophone stack. Then you have these more percussive elements. Pizzicato. That's just 6. And the panning of it is kind of all over the place. You have most hard panned, but then some less panned, just to give you a really full image. Yeah. You have all these notes too. Which is kind of the same philosophy as the earlier stack. High notes, stacking more. Those are just doubles. So you have weaving melodies within the actual stack itself that all contributes to one sound, but you can pick them out individually. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then with the low notes. So that's the first big stack. The second big stack is all of these vocals, which is also kind of ridiculous. If we just solo all of them and the lead vocal.
Oh, all I want is love. With you, we'll get through.
when doing all of these large stacks of the same instrument, I think it's best to, from a mixing and engineering standpoint, to treat them as if they were one thing. So instead of thinking about these as, 16 different stacks of vocals, we're now thinking about them as just one choir voice, and that helps to a more cohesive mix. Because it's really quite tricky to include 40 different harmonic and melodic elements that occupy the same frequency spectrum as each other. But you just blend them. So you have those stacks, then you have some other things that are coming in. The organ is doing its thing. Then to emphasize the energy and the feeling, you have these distorted guitars. Low in the mix, but it gives it this kind of growl feeling. Very distorted, but not much high end. Let's see here. I must have high pass. Yeah, here we are. Here's our high pass and low pass. It's quite aggressive of a high cutoff here. And with that, we also have this very textural guitars. Same ones as in the pre-chorus and the verse and everything. Just playing it with the slide and the EBow. And then you have the drums as well. The guitar, organ, mood vox, that synth hook, and that's kind of the atmospheric parts of the chorus as well. You still have the footsteps, drums. Footsteps cut to time. So to go into this mood vox, which I think is an interesting part. It's the same take, just really playing into the effects part of this. And it's subtle.
All I want is more from you. Lead well together and warm through the weather and the storms that.
Now we find ourselves in the outro. This is the only part of the song that does not have the organ in it. Instead, we only have the pedal, the bass pedal. Just because if I had the organ, it takes away from the tone that I was after. Because we have the two new elements, which are the guitar kind of from the second verse, just really distorted now, really squashed. I like that feeling a lot. We also have this plucked Telecaster too that's doing arpeggios. So with the drums, so that sounds really nice to me. But if I were to include the organ, it just kind of changes the tone in a way that doesn't make it sound distinct from the other sections of the song. So it sounds like this with the organ. Too much of the same thing. Without the organ, it's its own section.
At my Grange for dinner.
So you also have these classical guitars, which is an oddity, again, trying to differentiate this section from another section. Just strummed chords with a lot of reverb on it. Yep, just classic Valhalla vintage. Best reverb. And it's 2 takes. I do this all the time. They're not hard panned, but they're nearly. So that's kind of the DNA of the outro. You have, again, this kind of mood thing, doing something similar to what we heard in the intro as a kind of a callback, but it's more layered and a little bit more going on into it. Footsteps, which are not quantized or cut to tempo. It kind of gives it this really uneasy, kind of lilting feeling when the mood comes in. Otherwise, the first part of the outro is cut to tempo, you can hear. And then, I'll take out the guitars. It's more frantic. And my favorite part, when I almost trip and fall, if I raise the decibels. That's me tripping and falling. So that's the majority of the song in terms of the elements involved. There's more than it seems, but also less than you would assume. In the sense of it is organ, guitar, synthesizer, drums, vocal, saxophone. That is a lot of elements, but the sound is really big because of the way that I've stacked things and the way that I record them, in the way that things are panned and the engineering of the different elements. But that's overall what we're dealing with here. So to talk a little bit about the process of mixing this song, because it was very involved. As you can see, I'm relying quite heavily on bus processing and effects sends. All of these here are my reverbs, my parallel compression, parallel distortion. I like running tracks into sends because you have a little bit more tonal control when choosing how much of your distortion or verb you want to put to taste. And then busing is really helpful because with these large saxophone stacks, I like to put them all in one place. See, with this chorus stack, you can see all of the chorus saxophones are going into this bus, and that's what I mean by I'm treating this all as one thing. So, there's some EQ to kind of fit it in the space. I'm clipping a ton throughout this entire process. That's really helpful for controlling dynamics and making sure I have enough headroom. And also, so the sharp spikes and transients aren't overreacting, or the compressors, when you're mastering, aren't overreacting to these sharp spikes and transients. So I'm just evening everything out to kind of give it a more controlled dynamic sound. Then I have some pretty heavy compression on it. As you can see, it's a 10-to-1 optical compression. I'm using this distressor emulation. And then finally, I'm running the saxophones through a little bit of tape. And the reason why I chose this as an example to talk about the engineering is because most of the song follows the same principle of tonal shaping, dynamic control, further tone shaping with compression, and then even further dynamic control with things like tape emulation, saturation, distortion. That's really how I've come to this sound. And you've also noticed that the only thing that I have on my master bus, or my mix bus, I should say, is this clipper, which you can clip individual elements, you can clip the whole track, and it gives you different results. The reason why I did this is you can notice that I also pulled down the master fader by 4 decibels, because this session was really loud. I've had conflicting opinions about headroom in mixing because everybody has a different principle, but in my opinion, in the digital realm, you don't have to worry about headroom as much as in other ways when you're dealing with analog recording. And yes, different levels will affect analog emulation plugins differently because everything has kind of a different gain structure, so you want to be mindful of that. But by and large, I kind of stopped caring about headroom. I stopped fixating about headroom. Because let me play the chorus for you.
Oh, all I want
So as you can see, I'm clipping really aggressively. My peak, or my threshold is at -0.1, and it is far exceeding that. The reason why I'm clipping is because I want to give this song a feeling of not being polished, of being a little bit chaotic or a little bit gritty, because I just think that the sound really benefits from the sound of clipped distortion.
Oh, all I want is love.
You see that I'm clipping my mix bus, which is, people will tell you that it's not a good idea to clip your mix bus, and it's you can do it, you can not do it. I mean, it's not the best like technical practice, but if you're using a clipper to prevent those peaks, it just helped me in my mastering process. I know that's not right, it's not correct, but it serves the song and it sounds good, so what sounds good is good, in my opinion. Some other highlights, I'm doing classical or classic reverb treating techniques such as side chaining my reverbs to a sound source. So if let's go, this is automated quite heavily, so it'll be hard to find where I have this.
And feed you, I'll eat only after you. I'll cradle you when your knees are bruised.
So I'm ducking the sound of the reverb to give space for the vocals. I do that all over. I even do that, I believe, with the saxophones as well, and the backing chorus harmonies as well. Another thing of note is the parallel compression here on the saxophones. Looks like I'm feeding the bus into this effect. And again, I'm able to blend this to taste because I like the sound of the saxophones uncompressed because I'm already compressing quite heavily already on the bus. And then I'm sending it to more compression as well. And same thing with the organ. I'm using parallel processing a lot. This is kind of an Andrew Shepp's sort of philosophy. Same thing with the drums, like parallel clipping, compressing, and adding, I don't know, let's see, distortion. So I'm doing that all over the place. I think it's really helpful because you have really specific tonal control. Besides that, I think that's all there is to talk about with the song The Silos. There's more specific things like the writing or the harmony, but I think you can surmise a lot of that and synthesize that information yourself through just listening to the song. Like, I won't go into the writing of the lyrics or anything, maybe that's a separate video. I'm mainly just talking about the vocals as an instrument themselves and approaching it that way when discussing what I've done here. Besides that, yeah, I think that's really all there is to talk about. The song kind of takes an expansive approach where I start out very minimal and then build up to something massive and large and then change those elements over time to give you a sense of progression, because the actual structure of the song itself is verse, it's this thing, pre-chorus, chorus, outro. And, you know, the verse, pre-chorus, chorus is repeated. So the structure of the song is fairly straightforward, but the production is not. The production is really where the evolution of the song comes from. And again, you are wanting to emphasize the foundation of your song, the lyrics, the vocals, whatever rhythm that you have, or foundational harmony. It's really just serving the song and making sure none of it's distracting, while also giving the listener other elements to latch on to keep things fresh, to keep things interesting. And through this evolution of slowly introducing other sound elements, you can come to a really large journey of a song that takes you to different places. Substituting a drum machine for live drums, taking electric guitars and turning them classical. You know, there's so many different little things that you can do to evolve a track and its progression. Well, thank you so much for joining me through that process of breaking down the song. I might do a couple more of these, but we will see. I'm currently working on a bunch of different projects and other ventures, such as film composition and other video projects that I'm looking forward to getting into. But for now, I'll call it a day. Again, feel free to stream the album or stream this song from links in the description below. My music's on Apple Music and Spotify, along with other platforms as well. And yeah, just have a good time with it. Listen to some music, celebrate some creation. That's all for me for today. I will see you another time. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Braelen Addison, and I bid you adieu.